Oh, I'm going to try and do some comedy about climate change for about 10 minutes, and then it is a TED event, so what I'll do is I'll then talk about why afterwards. I have a PhD in climate change policy, which means I'm the sort of doctor that if, you have a heart attack and collapse on a flight, I will rush to your side, but only to berate you for flying. I work at one of the world's leading research institutions on sustainability and climate change, or as my dad likes to say, Matthew's 33 and still at university. My job title, I'm an environmental economist. That's what I do, which is a bit of an oxymoron, I find, when you tell people that. Environmental, oh yeah. Economist, no thanks. It's a bit like a human rights lawyer, yeah? Or a cocktail sausage. Anyway, let's get on to the climate change stuff. So, 2016 was the warmest year observed on record. 2017 was the warmest non-El Nino year. If you don't know, El Nino are a 5-piece Italian a cappella band. Anyway, people go, oh, well, that's great. Does that mean the planet's warming? Well, no, you can't look at 2 data points. You have to look at a trend over time. And clearly, over the last half a century, the planet has a warming trend. People go, okay, well, it's warming. Well, maybe it's natural causes, maybe it's other things. Well, actually, scientists have looked at that, and they've looked and they've found that pretty much every other cause that could be making that the temperature increase would be from natural things like the change in the sun and volcanoes and other things. All of that would have actually slightly cooled the planet over the last 150 years. So humans are actually causing about 110% of climate change. People say you can't give 110%. Turns out you can, and stop doing it. And most of that increase in temperature has been from our emissions, mostly carbon dioxide emissions, and most of that has come from our increased use of fossil fuels, which has increased about 8 times from the middle of last century. Things like coal, oil, and gas, which was actually the original name of the band Earth, Wind and Fire. And a lot of the older professors, that's their first joke they'll laugh at because they get the reference. Basically, it's dead dinosaurs, isn't it? Fossils in the ground causing climate change. It's quite scary in Jurassic Park, wasn't it, when the velociraptors learned to open the doors. Turns out they were playing the long game. Clever girls. And there's lots of heroes. I've got some heroes in climate change. Obviously, this person needs no introduction whatsoever. That is, of course, ex-UN Secretary General KiMoon. The best UN Secretary General of all time, and here he is. He's doing some sort of hipster convention, I think. No, of course not. That is Leonardo DiCaprio. And Leonardo DiCaprio, he is the UN envoy for peace on climate change. He had a film called Before the Flood about climate change, which is really good. And he's got his own foundation on climate change. And the reason that Leo hates climate change so much is because the only reason he got famous in the first place was due to an iceberg. So he's trying to save those. So that's a picture of Leo with Ban Ki-moon. And that is a picture of me at Warrington Bank Quay with a cardboard cutout of a moon. Warrington Bank Ki-moon. The best visual, thank you. The best visual joke about an ex-UN Secretary General you'll ever hear on TEDx. My girlfriend said, I'm not getting off the train to take that picture for you. It's not going to be worth it. Well, I think we can all see from the reaction that it got. So what are the impacts of climate change going to be? Well, it's going to be very difficult in the future to do your exams underwater. You're going to have a scuba mask on, there's pufferfish going by. Basically what I'm saying is the future is going to be like the film Waterworld. Terrible. And expensive, really. Really expensive. No, but seriously, what are the impacts of climate change going to be? Well, as you can see from this chart, the planet's going to get squashed and go sort of weird colours. And there's going to be 6 of them. So I don't know which one you want to live on. No, changes in temperature, sea level rises, precipitation. Now, people often ask as well, but they say, well, maybe scientists are split on this issue. But they're not. The consensus is that 97% of scientists say that climate change is happening and it's been caused by humans. We actually have more consensus that we are causing climate change than that smoking causes lung cancer, right? It's just, that is the fact. But I guess in the interest of fairness, I should give 3% of this over to the other science. So very briefly, some other scientists, they believe that the the rotation of the sun, and that's that. Okay. And we have to do this. So food is very important. This is one thing I was going to say. Food's one thing. Like, we already have huge problems globally because of population increase, and we're adding climate change on top of that. It's estimated that between the year 2000 and the year 2050, globally, we need to produce as much food as has ever been produced in the history of mankind. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that fact for you because it would require more deforestation to grow the sugar cane. But you know, in climate change, but now we have to do that while dealing with climate change. Like, this guy absolutely loves corn on the cob. Loves it, cannot get enough of it. But due to climate change, his hands have grown so big. You can't eat it. No, parrots are ruining crops because they're migrating earlier. Anyway, I think climate change is a bit like religion, right? Well, hear me out. Because we're sort of asked to give up our sinful pleasures now, to stop doing stuff for some far-off, distant benefit. And that messaging doesn't really work for people. And it's also a bit like religion in the sense that often, like if I do these shows and do comedy shows or whatever, afterwards people will come up to me and they'll go, Matt, that was one of the best things I ever saw in my entire life. No. They'll say to me, that was good, but do you feel like you're preaching to the converted? And I get that loads. Do you feel like you're preaching to the converted? And it's easy to imagine that the world is just converts and deniers because those are the only noises that we hear. But well, first of all, right, I'm not a preacher, clearly not. I'm just a normal guy, right, that just comes out and talks. And it just so happens that when I do come and talk to people, they sort of gather around my feet to hear about the wisdom I have to impart. I mean, I'm not saying I'm Jesus. I'm 33 and I'm trying to save the world. I love Easter eggs. Got a beard. I've got 12 friends and I don't trust one of them. My dad does nothing on a Sunday. Anyway, but it's easy to imagine the world is converts and deniers. It's not. Actually, this is a study from the Yale group, Climate Change Communication Group, and they show that this is in America, and it's actually been updated recently, I think. This is May 2017. But basically, the public's split into about 6 different groups, and you're alarmed. That's the people that you're converts, and that's about a fifth of the population, and your deniers at the other end, that's maybe about 10%. So the problem isn't climate change denial. The problem is that 75% of the population feel the same way about climate change as they do about a new U2 album. Ambivalent. Right? But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make people alarmed, as if they've just found out that that new U2 album is going to be downloaded directly onto their iTunes. So these are the groups: alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, dismissive, all things my dad has said about my career in the last year. But so yeah, I talked to people, and the concerned, that's the biggest group. It's about 30% of the population. And I spoke to someone the other day at a show, and I said, where do you think you see yourself, sir, in the audience? And he said, I'd put myself in concerned. And I said, what's stopping you becoming alarmed? And he said, it sounds exhausting. So it is. And the other group, the other big group, over half the population would be cautious if you add the concern and the cautious together. And cautious people, they think it's a huge issue, climate change, but they think there's maybe slightly bigger issues we need to focus on first, right? Things like the economy or terrorism. Those are the things that top people's lists before elections of what they're most worried about. But what can any of us actually do about the economy, or terrorism? Like, how many of you are actually trying to become the next governor of the Bank of England? Or what are you doing for terrorism, apart from putting a little plastic bottle in a little plastic bag at an airport? All of those 3 things are terrible for the environment. But you know what I mean? Like, you can't do anything about these things, but what can you do about climate change? Well, it's actually, you've got a lot of control about your own carbon footprint. You can start doing stuff. Food's very important this year, so I've tried to go vegan as well, as much as possible. I started doing veganuary, which was great. I did meat-free Mondays. I took her for some tofu Tuesdays. We were making corn by Wednesdays. And on Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays, we had a nut roast on Sunday. Oh, yes. But the hardest point of doing veganuary was calling it that without wanting to punch myself in the face, if I'm honest. But I've managed to change some things. Oh, by the way, people, stop drinking almond milk. It's meant for baby almonds. I drink a lot of coffee, so I looked at coffee and the milk that people, like cow's milk, people put in coffee. If you have a splash of coffee, a splash of milk in your coffee, you pretty much double the emissions associated with it. And if you have a latte, yeah, because you're a big baby and you need a big glass of warm milk, I'd like a latte, please. And your emissions are about 15 times higher, right? What I do now, I only drink oat milk, which is really weird when I have it on porridge, because it's like oat on oat action. I feel like the most Scottish man in the entire world. Like, I can't get enough oats. Can someone ground down some oats for me and pour them in my oats? So I've done that. What else? I forgot. Change your light bulbs. And we actually split up quite recently. I meant to remove these. I was working kind of late last night. I meant to take these out. And I forgot to. Sorry. Wish someone had told her no dumping. Anyway. What else? Flying. Have your girlfriend leave you so that you can't go on holiday because you're paying for a flat by yourself now. Basically what I'm saying, flying, it's the most emissions-intensive thing you can possibly do. The only comparable thing that we could do as individuals to create that amount of emissions in that amount of time would be setting a forest fire, genuinely. So what do we do about it? Well, if you're going to go find yourself, why not try finding yourself in Norwich? But there's no options to fly elsewhere, like long distances. We don't have any alternatives to flying, so you need to reduce demand. I think actually EasyJet and Ryanair are the most environmentally friendly airlines possible because they've been trying to reduce people's demand for quite some time, putting everybody off. We need to find other ways of talking about climate change. This is Ed Hawkins from Reading University has come up with these warming stripes, which are really good. It's just a different colour for every different year, which indicates a different temperature. That's from 1850 all the way up to now. But I don't know, how would you find a way of kind of bringing that sort of thing up at like a dinner party or something? I'm not entirely sure. What else can we do? We can, find other ways of talking about climate change. We can tell other people what we're doing. I've started putting a link to my green energy provider in all the shows that I do. And I've counted over the last year how many other people have switched their energy provider after coming to see me. And it's about 40 people, which equates to about 52 tons of CO2 equivalent, which is about 6 times my own personal carbon emissions. So, what I'm saying is if you start doing better things, other people might do that as well, and it can continue, and we then have some sort of societal change, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. We need people to take action, but we also need to do it together as a group and change society as a whole. Now, my girlfriend and I didn't split up. I just made that up to emotionally manipulate you. The way many people do with climate change. It's good to tell stories is what I'm saying. It's good to tell stories. It's good to joke about climate change as well. We need to find other ways of talking about this. It was a breakup that actually started me. This is the bit at the end where I actually talk about why I started doing it. It was a breakup. About 10 years ago, I moved back in with my parents and I'd broken up with a long-term girlfriend and I started a PhD on climate change. And it was quite a dark time for me. So I started doing comedy in the evenings as a way to get out of the house, right? And then about 8 years passed, and I had these two very weird separate careers where I'd, in the day, go and think about the world's most sort of complicated existential problem for the last, 50 years or so, and then at night I'd go out and just try and make people laugh and cheer myself up. And it kept going, but it got to a stage where I was like, very pulled apart. And people were like, well, what are you going to do? I kept getting that, and I felt like I didn't have enough time to do everything. And then I don't know why it had taken me so long, but I thought, well, why don't I try and use comedy to start talking about climate change? And that way it makes my life easier, and I think it's helpful for other people as well, because we all need ways to cope, don't we? When there's difficult topics, people always say, you have to laugh unless you'll cry. And I think that's the same thing. It's a very difficult thing to deal with climate change, that we are causing this and we're causing the amount of loss. And so actually comedy is a good way of coping with it. But it's also a good way of talking to other people, reaching new audiences on climate change. Because people feel like they're lectured to a lot. They won't listen to you. And that happens too much. You know, you have to think about your audience. So if people are being entertained and having a good time, they're much more likely to take on board facts and actually, you know, relax and trust who you are. So I think that's what I'm trying to say. We've got, you know, these different options. So we need, as a society, to try and find other ways of talking about climate change and accepting it as part of who we are as humans, and using it as a way to cope, but also using it as a way to talk to other people about it. So that's my talk. Thank you very much.